Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice from experts across the state. And we talk about all things: vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, and of course, your lawn. Hey, thank you so much for listening. I hope that this show is something that you really look forward to listening to every week, and that it gives you some inspiration that you can take out into your daily life and make your garden and yard as beautiful and productive as possible. Episodes drop every weekend on Apple Podcast and now Spotify. So you Android listeners that are listening to this maybe on the radio, you can look us up on Spotify and listen to Gardening Utah. We have a jam-packed show today, so we are going to get right after it right now. Today we have landscape designer Jessica Schmutz, and she is a designer with Progressive Plants. And we also have, of course, my sidekick Cameron here. And we are going to talk about new trends in landscape design. We're going to go over what plants are gaining a lot of popularity, how people are kind of rearranging their yards nowadays, and what it will be really hard to find in nurseries and garden centers this year. We also discuss why it's important to hire a landscape designer and how they can help you avoid pitfalls in your garden and your yard. And we'll get into that in just a minute. But first, the tip of the week.
860 KKAT. With your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is plan for the full size of a plant or a tree before you plant it in your landscape, especially if it's already a crowded landscape. Now listen, many of us, you get excited, you see a plant that you love or a tree that you love, but we really need to buy trees while considering what the eventual width and height of that tree will be. And keeping things in proportion with your yard and house will give your yard balance. So medium-sized and small-sized shade trees will look much better with a single story or a ranch-style home. And larger and taller trees will go much better with two-story houses. So think about how you're going to connect your project with other elements in your yard, like grass, buildings, patios, gardens, and walkways. And always read the label. That tree may be small right now, but in 10, 15 years, it might be giant, and it might be in a place in your yard where it is creating problems in the lawn or up against utilities or things like that. So just remember to plan for the full size of a plant before you add it to your landscape, and keep things in proportion with your yard and house, and it will give your yard balance.
And that's your Gardening Utah tip of the week, brought to you by The Advocates. If you're in an accident, you deserve an advocate. Call 801-355-5550 or visit utahadvocates.com. Never miss a tip for your garden, and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Okay, and speaking of balance to your yard, today is all about landscape design. And we have Jessica Schmutz, who is a landscape designer, and I can't wait for you to hear our conversation. Jessica has lived in Utah for over 20 years, and she completed a horticulture education program through Utah State, and she's been designing landscapes for over 7 years. Now, Jessica utilizes her natural artistic eye to design exceptional landscapes that achieve her client's vision while being sensitive to their level of experience and ability to maintain their property. So we've got Cameron Alcott here with Progressive Plants and Jessica Schmutz in just a minute. All right, we'll be right back after this, right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and we are in for a treat this episode. Today we have Cameron Alcott with Progressive Plants and landscape designer Jessica Schmutz. Jessica, welcome to Gardening Utah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
We've wanted to have you on the show for so long, so I'm really excited we got it done. So why don't you tell our listeners about how you ended up in landscape design?
Well, it probably started when I was a child, just because my mom immigrated from Germany and she was a farm girl. And we moved a few times, and everywhere we moved, she planted. And she even took plants with her, which I don't think you're supposed to do, but she'd sometimes dig up a rose bush or a small tree or something and take it with her because she had such a connection to the plants that she was taking care of and everything. So there was always that seed that was planted. And then, as I got older in life and what have you, I did a few different things, but no matter where we lived, even the first apartment my husband and I got, which was in the basement of a house, we lived under 5 single guys, but we asked the landlords, we're like, can we plant? Can I plant? And so it just, I guess, ingrained in me, wherever you live, you plant. And it was my first experience because I grew up back east and we tried to have a vegetable garden, and that was a unique experience in Utah. And it just kind of always was in me, to be honest. And then the design aspect, some people have just a natural interest in it, and that was kind of with me. And luckily for me as well, I just naturally have an eye for things. So the two married beautifully together.
Yeah. So why do you think it's so important? I mean, we could talk about this for the whole show, but why do you think it's so important to have a landscape designer work with you on your landscape?
Well, so there's a lot that goes into learning, A, how to take care of plants, and B, how to get the showing with the plants that you're looking for. And a lot of times when I go to people's homes, it's not that they haven't been willing to try, but it does take years and years to cultivate that experience. So, and then there is the aspect of it, which you can't necessarily always teach. And that's kind of knowing how to place things in a way that's going to be the most visually appealing. So why? So many reasons. Knowing what to plant where you live. There are different challengings in Utah, depending on where you are. If you're in Harriman or Saratoga or, down by me in Springville. It's also the different environmental factors. If you have deer, if you've got irrigation water, where's that water coming from? So there's the technical aspects of planting that come into play. But then there's also, I tell people all the time, if it doesn't look good, what's the point? Most people put plants in their yard for the sheer purpose of having it be beautiful. And so if you've tried to put in a bunch of flowers, but it's very hodgepodgey and mixed in performance, then you've put all this money into a yard that you continue to just be frustrated with. And so when you think about your long-term investment and how much money goes into just buying the plants alone, it's a lot better to have someone there that can help you minimize your waste and also help you achieve the overall look that you're going for, that sanctuary. Because most people have it in their mind. They've imagined this space, but bringing that to life is an entirely different thing.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking about it as you were talking, that you're not necessarily just, putting a shrub here and a tree there and making it look pretty. You're creating an ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, there's other aspects to consider, like year-round interest, which I think sometimes gets neglected. I just left a client's home who really wants a ton of perennials everywhere, but without having varying sizes of things, different textures, some evergreens for some visual interest during the off season, because I start asking them, well, what is it that you do back here? What do you want to enjoy the space for? Are you trying to be out here all year? Are you trying to, and as you start asking more and more questions, it's even things that they didn't even think about. But because, people like Cameron and I have been on site enough to know that sometimes I even have to brainstorm with them. They haven't even gotten to that point. They don't realize how many decisions go into making a garden an ideal space where it's enjoyable all year round. And there's blooms going at different times. There's such a technical aspect to what we do as well as artistic. So And it's fun. It's fun to teach people. They get very excited about the process.
Yep. I think one of the questions that we get a lot, or that, as designers that we need to ask quite a bit too, is the level of maintenance that people want to do in their yards. Because I think that people have this idea of like, oh, well, I want to have like lots of flowers, and I want like bees and butterflies and whatever, and all this type of stuff. And I just want flowers everywhere, something always going off. What a lot of people don't realize is that if you're going to do like these massive perennial gardens, like a cottage garden type look, there's two things that we get. I want my yard really pretty with lots of flowers, and I want it to be low maintenance. And I'm going to tell you right now, those two things are kind of contradictory. Because if you're going to have that many perennials in your yard and you always want to have something firing off, you're going to be out there deadheading and shaping perennials more often than you would like, which, sometimes really isn't that fun to do in July. Okay. Now there's ways to get around that. You can do like mass plantings of perennials where, Jessica and I, we talked about this quite a bit. I like to do like lots of groupings with, fewer amounts of fewer varieties of things, but longer blooming perennials. So they kind of go for a long time, but they take up a lot of space in the landscape, like in the planter bed. And I could just go out there with a weed eater and just chop that little block down when it's done blooming, and then I'm done.
I've noticed your plantings.
Yeah. But you can do different things with it. And, because Jessica and I, we worked on a project up at Promontory last year where it was 4 varieties of plants that we did, or 5 in that back area.
Well, and honestly, that was an approach where less was more, which is something that I mention to people sometimes, that it's hard to exercise restraint, but that's exactly what needs to happen sometimes in a lot of landscapes, is you can overcomplicate them. And again, at the property I was just at, it's so appropriate for what we're discussing. A lot of the perennials that were planted had already fully reseeded from the previous year. They were not cut back at all. And so I just kind of gave her a disclaimer that she's going to probably have a lot of babies everywhere, because there was a lot of open ground too. And so I mentioned just that if you're wanting to be back here weeding every day, coming out and talking to each of your plants and checking on them, which I would love to do that. I just don't have the time. So, bringing in color in other ways, whether it be through mass plantings, or I often try to explain that sometimes it doesn't have to be a flower. It can be a unique color in leaf, a burgundy, a red, a chartreuse. Those things create a bloom effect, especially when you're grouping them in such a way and putting contrasting colors together. It creates something really beautiful, a kaleidoscope, without having to rely heavily on just florals alone. And then, of course, you also have lots of shrubs. We love shrub roses. We love the hibiscus, the rose of Sharon's and stuff like that, because they do have a longer bloom time when they're going. And that is a floral. And as far as maintenance goes, it's not the same as having a bunch of different little perennials dispersed all over the property. But it really comes down to what the client wants at the end of the day. If they want that cottage garden, then I talk them through that process. I adjust expectations. I let them know about the maintenance. And then if they still want to do it, great, full steam ahead. Let's go for it. But if they're looking for, which is like 99.9% of the time, low maintenance, I'm going to focus on creating color with more textures and different leaf types than I am trying to use florals alone. Because they're also the lower maintenance plants, the pretty blue needles in the juniper, or a dwarf ginkgo with those chartreuse kind of leaves. You know, there's ways to create a lot of color without having to use a perennial at all, although I do love them. So
like Veronicas and delphiniums?
Yes. We actually did a podcast or a Facebook Live, and it was really hard. It was like, what's your favorite perennial? I don't know. I like all of them.
I was just going to ask you that.
It's funny. I think it's kind of like, I realized I'm kind of moody about it. I think as...
Really?
Yeah. Like artists do, maybe they're at a particular time, they're really turned on by a certain color, but then it changes. And so last year, if you asked me, I probably would have said, I love mallows, I love coreopsis, and then this year it's like, I love veronicas, I love delphiniums, I love asters, it kind of changes. But that's another thing to point out is there are trends in landscaping, just like there are in interior design. And there are plants that are going to be the it plant that year. And there are going to be some that are considered more out of style. I feel like yuccas for the longest time were just like, that was from like the 70s. And a lot of people had them planted in their 70s ramblers here in Utah. And now it's like, they're such a great texture. They're such an upright, sharp, they can look really contemporary. They can look really modern. And so it's interesting how plants kind of make comebacks, just like paint colors in a house. So.
Yeah, for sure. Because, and I think that you and I have talked about this before, because I started when I was a kid in this business. And so I was like maybe 11 or 12 years old. And I remember, like really popular things that now, like Jessica was saying, like the yuccas, weeping white spruce, lilacs are popular, irises are really popular. But back in the 90s, we couldn't give these things away. Like nobody wanted them. Another one, those catalpa trees, like those, the catalpa bungii. Which one's that? You know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
With the little bald head. I can't remember what the common name is. But that tree we get asked for like crazy. Umbrella catalpa, that's what it is.
Umbrella.
We get asked for that one like crazy. And I'm like, that tree's been dead for 50 years. Like nobody's wanted to plant it. I haven't seen anybody want to plant that since the 70s, and yet here we are. It's come full circle.
I actually put one in a design recently. It's so funny that you said that.
Okay, I have to put this in the episode notes because people are going to be wondering. So remind me the name again.
The umbrella catalpa?
Catalpa. Catalpa.
Okay, I'll have to put a link to it. Do you have them at progressiveplants.com, Cameron?
Yes.
Yes, because I'm on the catalog. I had to make sure that he had them because a lot of my clients want to buy their plants at Progressive. And so I don't want to put anything in on a design that I feel like is going to be too difficult for them to find. Luckily, Progressive has such a wide variety. It's usually not a problem at all. And they can always usually find it. If you want something really bad.
This year's going to be a little challenging, I think, for nurseries because of all the victory garden type thing that happened in 2020 with the COVID. A lot of 2021's inventory got sold in the latter half of 2020. So availability of funky things is going to be a little delayed, I think. I mean, perennials and a lot of shrubs. I think you'll see a lot more of those, a lot more variety by the time that June rolls around. Trees, though, are going to be a little bit harder. Those are going to be impacted for years to come because they take so long to grow and bring to market. I was telling Jessica, I think it was last week when we were talking about weeping white spruce, and I think I only have like 160 or something like that for the entire year.
Wow.
Yeah. Like heartbroken.
Something kind of scary.
I mean, that sounds like a lot, right? And that's actually two different varieties because you have the weeping white, the regular that's like 6 feet wide, and then they have the Morton's Tower, which is kind of still more of an up and comer that gets more like 4 feet. So when you think about a residential property, there's actually not a lot of evergreens that stay an appropriate size long term. You know, when people go out and they buy a Colorado spruce and they have like 0.20 of an acre, I'm like, where's that going exactly? So another reason to hire a designer, right, is so you don't put stuff in that you're going to have to take out because it gets too big. But yeah, 160 or whatever spruces is like, that's piddly. That's like, when he said that, I was like, crap, I'm going to be fighting for those. I'm going to have to get more creative.
To maybe put it into context, I think about like 160 spruce of those spruce is realistically about a 1 month supply for us, if that.
Wow.
Yeah. So after that, they're gone until later in the year.
That's the problem, right? Because you can have somebody in and just wipe them out, and then I'm mad.
Well, the nice thing about this though is that another reason to kind of hire a designer though is that they cultivate relationships with different nurseries. I mean, I'm obviously not the only nursery owner in the state. There's other nurseries around here, so they cultivate different relationships with other nurseries.
All right, we'll be right back after this, right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and we are in for a treat this episode. Today we have Cameron Alcott with Progressive Plants and landscape designer Jessica Schmutz.
Designers get exposed to different plants as well. So a lot of times there's more than one solution for a problem. And the nice thing that I like about Jessica is that she's always been able to like push the envelope of what you can use in an area. Like we'll find like these plants that like no one's ever even heard of before, and she'll like, let's do it, let's try it. I've got a perfect spot for it. We'll discuss the plant, its shape, its texture, what we think it'll grow into, how we really think it's going to perform here in Utah, and then she'll find like these really unique ways of using them. And I think that's something that has been pretty rare with a lot of landscape designers and landscape contractors over the years. I mean, it became so bland, especially from like the year 2000 to about 2015. It was like literally the same landscape. It was Carl Forster grasses, Anthony Waters spirea, Maynite salvia, probably Stella d'Oro daylilies, like the most boring plants that you could possibly put in a yard.
Yeah, very predictable.
Exactly. And then Jessica comes along, and when did we meet? Like 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Something like that.
Ooh, yeah, something like that. 2.5 maybe.
Yeah. And then we ended up, being like siblings. And then we just like talk and argue and have like these weird philosophies of design.
Well, it's funny because when you're getting to know somebody who maybe otherwise in the past you would have considered more of your competition. Like, I feel like we were sizing each other up a little bit. And anything he had to say that I didn't agree with or whatever, I made that well known. Although I still do that, don't I? I'm like, I like
the New York. The New York definitely comes out sometimes.
Yeah, it sure does. Don't get me mad. No. But no, I appreciate that. That's such a kind, sweet compliment. I actually really do pride myself on not being cookie cutter. I don't want people to look at my work and go, oh, she uses the same plants. Oh, she uses the same patterns. It just so happens that right now, because of trends and things like that, a lot of what people are looking for is similar. but there's still ways to give everybody a unique yard. And usually when I go into a scenario with some new clients, I can get enough information from them to really hone in on a style that will feel more intimate and personal to them. So I do get a lot of inspiration, not just for the space when I'm there seeing it, but from the clients specifically and what they're hoping for. So it's really fun. That's what keeps it fresh and interesting for me too.
Yeah. What are some of the trends that are happening right now that you see? What are the commonly requested things that people are asking for right now?
So right now, a pretty common trend is to see things laid out in more of a contemporary or modern fashion. So it's runs of stuff. But the thing that we do to try to keep it a little bit more fresh and not so on trend so that it stands the test of time is bringing in color. So for example, you can do an entry walk of a bunch of boxwoods, but maybe instead of just doing boxwoods everywhere, we switch it up a little bit and we do runs of different shrubs and different flowering things. I think hydrangeas, the limelights and the, what's the Italian word, Cameron? It's like paniculata, but that's not right.
The hydrangea paniculatas. Yeah, that's limelight.
Oh, I said that right. Oh my gosh.
You did.
You don't understand. I had the first time with the Latin. But those are definitely on trend right now, I would say, because they have an old-fashioned feel in the flower, but you can arrange them in a very modern way. And they're gorgeous punch of color later in the summer.
All right, we'll be right back after this, right here on Gardening Utah. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and we are in for a treat this episode. Today we have Cameron Alcott with Progressive Plants and landscape designer Jessica Schmutz.
Grasses are still definitely there, but thankfully we're branching out and we're using some more varieties. In particular, I love the Gold Bar Miscanthus. I'm probably going to make that one popular all by myself because the color on those blades is just stunning. I just love it. It's striped like a zebra and it's a nice, strong, medium green. And then the stripe on it is a lime green, a super chartreuse. And so it has this really cool, modern, sharp blade, and it can actually lend itself for quite a few styles. It would look great in a Zen garden. It would look great in something more woodland, but for some of these more modern contemporary. So, you have the farmhouse look, but with that, having organized beds, still having florals that are what I would call cutting flowers. So like the hydrangea, works well with that because it lends itself to that idea that you can actually cut the foliage and put it in your house, but still have it look kind of clean and pretty outside, organized. It's definitely about being more organized. And then the black lava rock is major on trend right now as a top coat. Any kind of dark base really makes the greens and everything pop, makes things look more lush. And where Utah's kind of more of a high desert, we're breaking away from that.
There's one thing that I kind of want to cut in on that one too. Now, the one thing that I think a lot of people don't take into consideration when it comes to landscape design, which I know that you do, is if you're going to be using like a lava rock or any type of rock mulch or anything like that, that absorbs so much heat and then radiates that heat at night that a lot of people don't realize what kind of effect that has on the plants. And so you're going to have to choose the right type of plant to work in that particular situation. So, when Jessica's using like, a gold barb miscanthus, which is a beautiful grass, by the way, spot on choice with that one. I'm glad that one's one of your favorites. I wish I could just grow more of them for you. But, those types of choices are going to impact, like, the how good your landscape's going to hold up during the heat of summer, and how like visually appealing that it's going to be. So I mean, if you wanted to do, like fescue, because a lot of people like the blue color of fescue against, like the black lava rock or whatever, that's going to look absolutely terrible by the time that June 15th hits, because fescues are a cool weather grass. It's one of those, choices that, if you make it's the wrong plant for the wrong space. And that's why I think having a landscape designer to help you, who understands plants, mind you, like Jessica does, that's why I think it's important to hire that designer who knows exactly how the plants are going to perform for you for the entire year.
Yeah, that's a great point, because in a more modern landscape, there tends to be more space, right? And so we do have to make sure, especially in a full sun exposure, that those plants going in are going to be tolerant of the heat that is going to be coming, and they're still going to perform. Because I mean, I've said this so many times. I tell clients all the time, if the plants aren't performing, what's the point? Like it looks like crap. So we want to make sure we're putting things in that are going to work for the space. And so, yeah, when I go to a property, one of the first things I do is I go, okay, which direction am I facing? What's the sun exposure? And then, okay, what's the water? What's the soil? There's so many questions to ask and get answers to before I can even think about picking actual plants.
Absolutely. And it also depends on, like you said earlier, is the homeowner going to want to do maintenance on those plants? What is their lifestyle like? Do they go on vacation a lot and leave, or are they tinkering in the yard every weekend? That, of course, I'm sure dramatically impacts the plants that you select for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that I use a lot of dwarves as a result, because part of what makes a yard high maintenance, even with shrubs and stuff, is if it wants to be 6 feet, but you're constantly trying to keep it at 3, you're going to be out there a lot, shaving it back. And even though a lot of shrubs can tolerate that kind of pruning, it's a lot of work. So instead, I like to put plants in that can just be what they're meant to be.
Yeah.
And work full size, and then there's much less work involved.
Yeah. One of the other trends that I saw this year too has been edible landscaping. There's been a lot of demand, at least that I've been getting, at the nursery and whatnot, of, like, hey, I want to have a food forest on my daybreak lot, which, are really kind of small, and so it seems like there's the nice thing is that there has been a lot of development in plants, edible plants that are actually their structure has been bred to be, in style for, the contemporary type landscapes. So like there's some apples now that are very columnar and narrow, which are kind of neat. And there have been a lot of berries that have been developed that stay small and compact. They're a little bit easier to deal with.
That is so say that, because I have a side yard that has been ornamental primarily, and I have plans to change it this year into an edible garden because I have grow boxes like everybody else. But if you want gooseberries or currants, or you want to, and I actually, when I talk to people about it, I counsel if we're limited on space, to maybe focus on those fruits and things that are harder to buy at the store, because sometimes it's like, well, apples are pretty easy to get. So unless you want the work and you have the room for the fruit trees and stuff, then maybe go buy those. But if you want a dwarf pawpaw and we can make that fit, let's try that. Or if you want a vine, let's get you some goji berries, or let's get, there's a lot of really interesting edibles that would be considered more rare. And I
Cameron's shaking
Cameron.
his head.
Don't ever plant a goji berry.
Do you not like goji berries?
Well,
What?
they're kind of an invasive species.
Oh, really?
Well, just a minute. See, this isn't something that I disagree with him about. Because if you have the desire to learn about this plant and to take care of it, right, then I'm very supportive. Unlike some of my colleagues that are just like, you want to do what with the wisteria? Do you know how hard that's going to be? Do you know how big those get? Like, I'd rather just be like, you know what? Wait. Okay, let's talk about this for a minute, because you can learn. You can learn. Now, maybe someone who's never played with gardening before shouldn't just up and buy a trumpet vine, for example. Not understand that might be a huge mistake to have that on your house or whatever. It's going to pull your stucco off. But yeah, do your research and live professional.
Okay, well, Jana, I'm just going to throw this out here. Well, you know Liz Hamilton. You've had her on the show a couple of times, both of us together.
Love Liz.
So Liz and I, it's not unusual for us to both kind of like tag team projects. And a lot of times they'll ask me to, for like different plant recommendations and stuff, just because I have a little bit more access to different varieties and what she's aware of. But every single project that I work on, I always make sure that I install a goji berry because Liz Hamilton hates them.
Oh.
And she has to take care of it.
You're so funny. Oh my gosh. Well, even stuff like pine berries or I was actually looking into this the other day. It's not a blueberry, but it's very close to one. What am I thinking of, Cameron?
The honeyberry?
Honeyberry. So,
or a yesberry? Yesberry?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a relative of the honeysuckle family. It's actually, the genus is a Lonicera, which is your honeysuckles.
Yes. Well, this is an edible berry that tastes similar to a blueberry, and blueberries don't necessarily do hot out here. So it's a nice alternative. So, there's just, I encourage experimentation. If you've got room for it and you're okay going into it, knowing that there's a fail rate. Like people sometimes say to me, well, so after I put all these plants in, how many am I going to lose? And I'm just like, that's scary, but you could do everything right and something might still die. And it's okay. They just don't transition for whatever reason, or they just don't like that spot in your yard. Sometimes they come already sick, but never from progressive like that. And
thank you for the plug, Jessica.
And, there's just factors. And so I usually tell people, just expect maybe a couple things might not do well. And especially the first year or two, don't expect for things to just take off and be crazy happy. Like, it takes some time for them to acclimate to their new home.
Especially in Utah, if you're planting in the summer.
Well, let's put a disclaimer. If you try to plant stuff in July or August, you're kind of on your own.
I'm not going to interject at all and say that's usually when I do my planting, is in July.
Yeah.
You really have to baby them. Be careful.
Yeah. How do listeners get a hold of you, Jessica?
So they can go to Progressive's website, actually, and schedule me there. There's a link that says Design Services, I believe, right, Cameron? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And then you pick that, and there's actually a couple different designers for progressive that are all amazing. And depending on where you live or what just speaks true to you about that designer, you can just click a green button under their name and you can book them. And then the services come up that are available. And then also each designer has their own schedule of availability, that link right there. So you can pick a day and a time when they're available, and it's all confirmed, and it works really well. It's very streamlined.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you would want the state of Utah to know right before the end of the show?
Don't give up. No.
I love it.
Just keep going for it. No matter how many things you kill, you'll figure it out. Like I a lot of plants back in my day.
I've killed probably hundreds of thousands at this point, so I'm still doing it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think there's one last important point of note is that even if you have an established landscape and need to make changes, you can still call and utilize your services, correct?
Something I do a lot, where we want to update, we want to take out the stuff that's overgrown. A lot of the varieties put in got way too big for the space, but there are some things we want to keep. Or how do we work where we can maybe take just a couple things out and give it more of an updated feel, or we don't have any flowers and we want some. There's just so many requests in that regard. But yeah, deciding on what stays, what goes, and how to fill in the blanks and do it in a way where it doesn't look so choppy. Yeah. We want everything to feel natural and have a really good flow. And depending, I'll choose varieties that will grow faster just so it can fill in that much quicker. Yeah, there's a lot. And again, it's based a lot on what the homeowner is looking for.
Yeah. And I think I just thought of one last thing is that when you're selling your home, one of the most important things you can do to increase the value of it and increase the sellability, not that Utah has a problem with that right now, but is to spruce up the landscape, right? It really.
I have a cute little story about that. I'll share really fast. So the second place my husband and I lived was a townhouse, little corner townhouse, had an association fee, but I was able to plant around the house itself, right? And so I did. There were multiple homes for sale. It was transitional area, lots of college students. Mine sold so fast, and I know it's because of the curb appeal. And I also got full price. So
That's awesome.
Plants definitely add value. A lot of what happens inside a house is easily changed with paint. You know, a lot of stuff is just cosmetic. The yard, though, if you've got good bones there, if it's already in a way that you love, oh, what a relief, right?
Totally.
It's huge. And I think I read something recently that said that good landscaping can add up to $10,000 to the value of your property. So that's significant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jessica, Cameron, thanks so much for being here on Gardening Utah.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Gardening Utah. I hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you for spending some time with me. And as always, you can let me know what you would like to see on the show, or maybe ask a gardening question. You can find us by opening the episode notes in Apple Podcast or Spotify and send us a message on Instagram, Facebook. We have all kinds of links inside the episode notes on how you can get a hold of us and the sponsor and even the guests from today's show. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, and maybe I'm going to ask you to leave us a 5-star review, because listen, we love to bring you this content. We hope you enjoy it, and we really appreciate those reviews. It helps our show grow, pun intended. Shout out to our producer, Lambo. I'm Jana Francis. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week here on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.
We are supported by ProgressivePlants.com. ProgressivePlants.com. They are your neighbors next door and experts at helping you choose the perfect and unique plants that will thrive in your location. Progressive Plants is passionate about helping homeowners, expert gardeners, novices alike choose the correct plant for your soil. They don't just grow plants, they know plants. Let Progressive Plants help you today. Just go to ProgressivePlants.com and check out their wide selection. You can also go to the Design tab and look at the expert designers that they have that can help you plan your perfect yard. Visit ProgressivePlants.com today.